Chapter 18, PCP, or angel dust. A few key facts. A precursor to ketamine, developed for medical use but discarded due to unpleasant side effects, PCP is a dissociative anaesthetic. It's not overly popular, and its popularity seems to increase and decrease in cycles. It's consumed by snorting, swallowing, smoking, or injecting. The timescale is varied depending on how it's consumed, but it's likely to last several hours at least. Effects are extremely varied from stimulation to sedation. They can include hallucinations, time distortion, mood alterations, increased body temperature, heart rate and blood pressure, and shallow or irregular breathing. Phencyclidine, often called PCP or angel dust, was initially developed as a dissociative anaesthetic back in the 1920s. It was tested extensively in human participants, but its risk of severe side effects led researchers to develop a similar compound with fewer side effects. That substance was ketamine. PCP is quite a challenging substance to write about because it can be taken in a load of different ways, can have very varied effects, and although it has been studied extensively as an anaesthetic, how it's used recreationally has been less well documented. As well as that, it is a substance that has had a lot written about it in the press throughout its history. The drug has been demonised and linked to superhuman strength, cannibalistic tendencies, and horrific attacks and murders. But exaggeration and misinformation can certainly occur around illicit drugs, so exactly how much of its bad reputation does PCP deserve? I've done my best to cut through all the hyperbole and present what we know while making it clear what we don't and what's incorrect. What are the short-term effects? PCP can be taken in many different ways, as an oil, a liquid, a powder, crystals, or in tablet form. PCP oil is yellowish in colour, while powders, crystals, or tablets can range in colour from white to light brown. As well as coming in multiple guises, PCP can also be consumed in a variety of ways, including sniffing, swallowing, injecting, or smoking. Some people will spray PCP onto tobacco or cannabis and smoke it like a cigarette. Smoking PCP in this way is sometimes called getting wet or referred to as embalming fluid. The method of consumption will impact on the timings of intoxication experience. Smoking or injecting will lead to a faster intoxication onset, around 2 minutes, than swallowing, half an hour to an hour, with sniffing being somewhere between the two. Reports of how long intoxication lasts are extremely varied. Some say a person will remain intoxicated for 2 to 5 hours, some say 4 to 8, others suggest it could last for as long as 48 hours. Length of intoxication could also be affected by a number of things, route of administration or size of dose, as well as various factors about the person themselves. When a person takes PCP, it's very hard to predict what their intoxication experience will be like. The dissociative effect can induce a numbing, dreamlike or floaty sensation. Some can experience audio or visual hallucinations and alterations in time perception, where it could speed up or slow down. PCP can alter mood and can make someone feel detached from reality. For some, this could be severe, in the form of paranoia or even transient psychotic experiences. If people are already prone to psychosis, PCP can make their condition substantially worse. Physiologically, PCP will increase body temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure, and it might make you constipated. At very high doses, a person will experience the anaesthetic effects of the substance. A person's breathing can become slow and shallow, although some people find that PCP causes irregular breathing, where breathing will be fast and then stop briefly before starting again. Some people can experience convulsions after taking PCP. It can cause uncontrollable eye movements, and the anaesthetic properties can also mean that a person on PCP can hurt themselves quite severely without realising. More contentious is whether PCP can cause aggression and violence. Certainly, when PCP was a popular recreational drug in the USA in the 1990s, media reports suggested it can make people extremely aggressive. Although how popular it was may have been exaggerated, as described later in the chapter. These reports also stated that PCP gave people superhuman strength. Again, more on that later. PCP intoxication has been linked to suicide. Again, it's not necessarily clear whether PCP causes this directly, or whether people are more prone to take risks or have accidents while intoxicated. That's quite the list of effects. Some seem stimulant-like, some depressant-like, some hallucinogenic, and some analgesic. As I said earlier, it's extremely difficult to predict whether PCP will make a person sleepy or super energized, whether it'll increase their heart rate and blood pressure or slow their breathing. Similarly to alcohol, it's been found that PCP impacts on loads of different neurotransmitters throughout the brain: NMDA, GABA, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, opioid receptors. All of these receptors and neurotransmitters are involved in different brain functions, which might explain the wide variety of effects, some of which seem contradictory. PCP is also soluble in fats, water, and alcohol, and this might explain why the effects can be so different from person to person. All sorts of things might impact on what kind of PCP intoxication experience a person has. Biological sex, height and weight, what a person has eaten, whether they've had alcohol, and general health will all impact on how and where PCP is absorbed by the body, so the intoxication effects can vary wildly. Taking too much PCP can be extremely dangerous, with a risk of hyperthermia, coma, and death. PCP can also have some pretty unpleasant withdrawal symptoms if a person stops taking it after using it for a while. These can include psychotic experiences, anxiety, tremors, diarrhea, and eye shakes. What are the longer-term effects? Longer term, there's evidence that regular heavy use of PCP can lead to tolerance and dependence, meaning higher doses will be required to get the same effect, and potentially the wish to take the substance could turn into a need. Heavy use has been associated with later memory problems, depression, psychosis, and paranoia, as well as poor appetite and weight loss. Whether this is due to the substance itself or the impact it has on a person's ability to take good care of themselves in terms of sleep, nutrition, and the like, is harder to say, but either way, the outcome on the individual remains. Myths and misconceptions. PCP is a substance that got a whole lot of media attention, particularly in the 1990s. As such, myths and misconceptions built up around it. Here are some of them. PCP will give you superhuman strength. In 1991 in Los Angeles, after a car chase, police officers were caught on film using what appeared to be excessive force to restrain a man named Rodney King. King's injuries included broken bones and multiple bruises and lacerations. It was deemed to be severe enough to warrant the police officers involved having to face prosecution for it, and the trial had plenty of media coverage. The police officers' defence stated that King appeared to be intoxicated on PCP. They said he was able to stand even while police officers tried to swarm him to restrain him, and that he continued to try and get up after he had been hit and restrained multiple times. At the time, it was often reported that PCP would give people superhuman strength, and indeed, police officers in LA at the time had been instructed that they could be harmed by people who were intoxicated on PCP because of this. In actual fact, there's no evidence that PCP can give an individual superhuman strength. What it might do is remove a person's restraint and numb them to any pain, which might make them less inhibited and therefore appear stronger. Even this is speculation, though. It could also be that given PCP was used mostly by black men in their 20s, this profiling of PCP users as dangerous, violent superhumans could very well have been tinged with more than a little racism. As for Rodney King, he admitted to being intoxicated on alcohol, which he claimed was why he fled from the police in the first place, but denied having taken PCP, and an expert witness toxicologist testified that alcohol and cannabis were found in his blood sample, but PCP was not. So, this is a myth. PCP will turn you into a cannibal. The proliferation of this myth is likely linked to the case of a rapper called Big Lurch. In 2002, he killed his roommate, cut her open, and apparently ate some of her lung. There are also cases of people gouging their own eyes out while on PCP, of people walking into traffic, and many pages of press coverage over the years have been filled with accusations of PCP-induced murder and mayhem. Is this right? The effect that PCP will have on someone will depend on their underlying personality, their current psychological state, the environment that they are in when they take it, and any other underlying risk factors for severe mental health problems like schizophrenia. And even with severe illnesses like schizophrenia, This does not mean a person is therefore more likely to become violent. In fact, lots of research suggests that people with schizophrenia are more likely to be a danger to themselves than to other people. Some researchers even found that they are also more likely to be the victims of crime, which might indicate some sort of confounding going on in this research. It's highly unlikely that one-off use of PCP in an individual with no risk factors for psychosis would lead to an extreme event like the ones detailed in the media. Which isn't to detract from the risks to the self and to others from intoxication, and the possibility for awful consequences when a person does develop psychosis after taking a substance. But the substance does not exist in isolation, and therefore the risks of a reaction like that of Big Lurch, whether he was on PCP or not, will depend on all sorts of things. Set and setting, as we've seen throughout this book, can't be underestimated. So it's a myth. Does PCP have any medical uses? PCP was initially developed by a pharmaceutical company and tested on a number of different animals in order to ascertain its properties. Right from the outset, it was clear that PCP was unpredictable. It had quite different effects in different animals. In rodents, it seemed to cause excited drunken behaviour, while in pigeons, it induced what researchers referred to as a cataleptoid immobilised state. In dogs, it caused delirium. When tested on monkeys, it showed enough promise as an anaesthetic to warrant testing in humans. It was found to be safe as an anaesthetic, but participants given it in trials reported unusual and unpleasant side effects during recovery, some of which included feelings of sensory deprivation, like being unable to feel their limbs. Its use in humans as an anaesthetic was halted, and chemists continued to tweak the chemical formula, looking for a similar anaesthetic without such extreme side effects, and discovering ketamine in the process. But this wasn't completely the end for PCP's use in medicine. Some researchers noticed that the intoxication effects of PCP looked quite similar to symptoms in patients with schizophrenia, and wondered whether this similarity could be harnessed in some way. Researchers at the Lafayette Clinic in Michigan began a program of work where they compared the effect of PCP intoxication in healthy individuals with the behaviour of patients with schizophrenia. They even added a third and fourth condition, LSD or barbiturate intoxication, as control groups in their studies. They ran a battery of tests on different types of abilities, including things like attention and reaction time, and found that people on PCP performed more similarly to people with schizophrenia across the tasks, as compared to either those sedated by a barbiturate or those intoxicated on LSD. Interestingly, they found that people given PCP tolerated the drug better when in conditions of sensory isolation than when not isolated. The researchers reported that they used this finding to inform their practice with patients with schizophrenia, allowing them space and isolation, and anecdotally at least, seeing improvements in symptoms after doing this. Research into schizophrenia using PCP was also conducted in animals. Since it was hypothesized that PCP could induce an experience like schizophrenia, pharmacologists could test the potential effects of drugs being developed for treating schizophrenia by seeing whether those drugs could reverse the effects of PCP. This tended to occur in the 1950s and 1960s, when little was understood both about the effects of PCP and schizophrenia. These days, it is now accepted that although PCP might be similar to some aspects of schizophrenia, it does not operate in exactly the same way, and therefore is probably quite a limited model of the disease. We are still a long way from discovering all there is to know about schizophrenia. In fact, many people argue that the set of symptoms of the disease are so varied that in all likelihood it may not be one disease, and that we should move away from the diagnosis entirely. Whatever we call it, it can be a debilitating and life-changing diagnosis to receive, and therefore substances that can induce psychosis, even if transiently, should be taken seriously. How popular is PCP? Despite media reports, PCP has never been one of the more popular recreational drugs, probably because the intoxication effect can be extreme. Its use has been best documented in the USA, and reports suggest that patterns of use have tended to be localised into various metropolitan areas across the country. A recent study looked at hospital admissions for PCP intoxication in the USA between the 1970s and the early 2010s. They found a waxing and waning pattern, which they suggested could be due to generational forgetting. When PCP is more widely used, its effects are better known and its popularity decreases. And when a new generation who don't know its effects come along, its popularity increases again. That could be an explanation for this, but there could be any number of other explanations too. For example, rising or falling hospital admissions could be due to quality and strength of the substance at the time, which could also be affected by all sorts of things. It's very hard to say. It's also worth noting that hospital admissions are a very extreme example of use. If you've had to go to hospital, you're necessarily having a bad time, but this might not be true of all users. Similarly, it's rare for people to have only used one substance. One research paper looking at hospital admissions for PCP use found that 1 in 4 people admitted had also taken benzodiazepines, 40% had also consumed cannabis, and 40% had alcohol in their system as well.